Waiting people for you, Sue.
Okay.
I'm turning off my sound, so I'll stop laughing at you, Sue.
Thanks. People though. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to Thursday's Kiwanis Let's Talk. It's Thursday, March 11th. And if anybody thinks about it, it was a year ago that we were actually kind of shut down, if you want to put it that way. That we started into our pandemic. It's hard to believe it's been a year, but for those of us that are out helping vaccinate, and for those of us who have been able to get the vaccine, I believe that we're heading in the right direction, and that's very exciting. I'm very excited to see that today. So I want to thank everybody. For those of you who are first joining us for the first time, we welcome you to tonight's program. My name is Sue Peterson. I will let you know that we are booked now through May, June, July is my next available time frame. So I am reaching out to some of our presenters or names that people have submitted to me. We actually already have sessions in August and September already. Next week, Lindsay Weichel from the Kiwanis International staff will present on the Amplify program, which is the education program that we have. And then Cole Freyer will talk the week after on the next generation, helping the next generation. And then on April Fool's Day, April 1, as I posted on our Facebook site, past President Paul Palazzolo will be joining us that day. And for those of you that know Paul's got lots of jokes. He's a huge Abraham Lincoln fan, and does a great presentation on a successful Kiwanis Club. So he has agreed to be with us that evening. So we're excited about that. So this evening, I'm happy to welcome Shandy Longcore. Our speaker today is one of the most positive and energetic individuals you might ever meet. She might have some competition in this room, though. Normally, you'll find her speaking in person at school assemblies and companies, but with in-person mass gatherings on hold for now, a Zoom call will make it work. Kiwanis of Michigan has formed a partnership with Shandy and her nonprofit Embracing Imperfections. You'll find that information in our service community partners portion of our website. You'll also find information about the Youth Summit on Suicide information, which Shandy will be also referencing today. 2 years ago, Shandy hung up her beloved career as a director of a premier fitness facility to follow a different calling, to share her story in hopes to help others. She has the capacity to startle, and yes, I said startle, because what you're about to hear, at least in the beginning, will likely make you sit up and take notice. In the end, you will be filled with hope and challenged in new ways to consider your capacity for reaching out to others, including the power of one. So I ask everyone to make sure your mics are muted tonight. And I want to let you know that tonight's subject matter could is a trigger warning for those of you who have been personally affected by suicide. So I want to just give that warning out to everybody ahead of time. But knowing this, let's please join me in welcoming Shandy Longcore with Embracing Imperfections. Shandy?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I have thoroughly enjoyed being with you the last 2 weeks. I don't know if anybody noticed that or not, but you had a stranger amongst you, and I'm glad I'm no longer a Kiwanis stranger. I feel a part of your family. So thank you for welcoming me and for having me. I sound okay?
You got a couple of breakups here and there, but I think let's go ahead and go.
Okay. And then can you see my screen okay?
We can, yes.
Great. All right. Let's rock and roll. So usually when speaking all things assemblies, right, with high schoolers and middle schoolers, that, as you can imagine, is a pretty big job keeping all things of people, who instant gratification and that type of thing. It's an interesting world. And I usually start out with having them be vulnerable with me and give me quirky things. I'm going to spare you all and not ask you what are quirky things about you, but that's what would happen if you were in my audience. So at an assembly. I'm going to dive right into my quirks. I actually have 9 toes. True story, it's the melanoma. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but when you have melanoma on your fingers or your toes, you're left with no choice but to amputate. I can clap with one hand. If you're feeling adventurous, feel free to try that at home. Yes, you won't get hurt. Go ahead, clap with one hand. If you want to hear mine, I'll put it by the speaker. I have been mugged before. Yeah, that was a bad day. I accidentally started a forest fire. That was another bad day. And thankfully it was okay. It ended up definitely needing the help of the fire department, but nothing too major, thank goodness, because it was embarrassing enough to begin with. But I'm also glad and proud and excited to be able to say that I have saved the life of a man with a team of people that were dedicated to helping this person that had a cardiac arrest and the use of an AED. Actually, 2 people to be specific. So one could say life shouldn't get any more dramatic than that, but for me, it does. And today, at the risk of startling you, I'm going to share with you my raw, my real, my imperfect life story, and really how I'm lucky to be walking this earth. And while my story is a way of getting your attention, it's not actually what I want you to take away from our time together today. Instead, I want you to take away and internalize what would have helped me and what did help me in living this thing we call life, and how we're all connected by something I like to call the power of one. And by the way, I will be taking questions at the end, so feel free to kind of take notes if you want to, or throw them in the chat. So I'll reference all the questions at the end. Other insights that we'll be going over are talking, the idea and concept behind that, the concept of getting through a millisecond, mental health strategies, and again, the power of one. But to set the stage, I want to start by going back in time and kind of set the stage for my life. I was born in April of 1981 to a loving set of parents and an older brother who was as kind as he could be, right, to his younger sister. I grew up in the Kalkaska, Michigan area. So if you're not from Michigan, or if you've never heard of that crazy sounding town, it's a small town in northern Michigan, the northern part of the Lower Peninsula. The next biggest city would be Traverse City. Really small. My dad, Randy, was the jack of all trades. He started out as the music teacher before owning the town hardware store for 20 some odd years. And then he eventually went back into teaching 2nd and 3rd graders, which I just think is adorable. And that's what he retired from. My mom, Sheila, that's how I got my name, by the way, SH from Sheila and Andy from Randy. You put that together, then you have me. I was not named after the drink, just wish I had royalties to that. But my dad, I told you a little bit about him. My mom, she was a nurse working her way up the ladder, so to speak, into management at our local hospital. She was the leader, right? She was definitely that person that was all about growing and leading people in that sense. My dad was the hugger, right? And make everybody smile and that kind of thing. I guess you could say I was a small town kid living in a small town world. And this was during a time when you let your kids go and play and you didn't worry exactly where they were or how long they were gone. It was pre-social media, right? It was fun. It was a simple time. Maybe you can relate to some parts of my childhood, maybe not, but what you probably didn't endure were feelings of inadequacy like I endured at the age of 10, or maybe not as severe as I endured. Now, that's not to say I was neglected or abused, because no. To further paint you a picture of my childhood, it included a lot of fun with friends, playing games and creating forts in the neighboring woods. And my brother and I were blessed to travel quite a bit throughout the United States with my parents, because they would actually take us out of school and we would go visit different cities that where the Ace Hardware Convention was. For whatever reason, that didn't happen in Michigan. So we thought we were the coolest kids on the block because we got to travel the United States and being taken out of school for it. So it was pretty fun childhood if you think about it, right? My dad lovingly referred to me as Shandy Pandy. And by all accounts, I was destined to grow up as a fairly normal kid with a fairly promising future. Looking back, though, I initially considered that I was simply over obsessing because something went really, really wrong. And I didn't know, but I guess what else could really explain August 23rd, 1991, when I was just 10 years old. And to give you kind of a frame of reference, here I am at 10 years old, and I think it's really important to just pause for a moment and have you all focus in on the idea and concept that you see two smiles, right? You see the softball pitcher smile and the looks like a skating rink kind of like smile. And that is just to kind of bring light that someone can absolutely have a smile on the outside, yet have a storm brewing inside of them. It was a rainy Friday. Why I remember that, I don't know, but school was still a few weeks off and I was having an uneventful summer. Certainly nothing worth complaining about, right? But still, for some unknown reason, I didn't feel loved, even though of course I was loved. And I also didn't feel pretty. And in my adolescent mind, I thought the ticket to being pretty was a wig. Again, 10 years old. So I did something pretty crazy. Feel free to raise your hand if you've ever cut, if you remember as a kid, like cutting a lock of hair. Well, I was making room for a wig. So I actually cut off all of my hair the night before. And the hope was to go to my mom, or at least the plan rather, was to go to my mom, who was going to drive me to Traverse City, buy me that wig, and that would make me pretty. So you can kind of see where this is going. I also had likely an undetected mental health issue. So these were kind of like the three boxes I was dealing with at just 10 years old. Again, this is 1991. So mental health was not necessarily talked about at that point. So box number one, an undetected mental health issue. Box number two, not feeling loved. Box number three, not feeling pretty. Well, I decided to check off one of those boxes and cut that hair. And the next morning I woke up to go to my mom to, make everything all right. And I discovered that she left for work early that day. And my dad too was at work and wondering where I was to perform my duties alongside him at our hardware store. See, when you own a family business, and maybe some of you can relate, your summers are not exactly spent hanging around the country club pool. Instead, for me, summer meant working part-time at the cash register to help my family make ends meet. So my dad comes home to see what I was up to, and he reacted like many parents would react when he sees, my lack of hair. It was something like, "What in the world did you do to your hair?" And unfortunately, instead of him seeing this as my cry for help, we landed ourselves in a major argument. And it was that kind of an argument that it still kind of gives me goosebumps today, because it wasn't pretty. It was just full of nasty words, and it leaves a permanent mark on your heart. And my dad, still befuddled, returned back to work, still fuming over what I had done, while I was left alone to ponder my next move. And unfortunately, I chose the wrong one. See, without thinking, without writing a note, I decided I wanted that pain to end. And years earlier, after our grandfather had passed away, I knew exactly where the rifle, the 30-30 hunting rifle of all types of rifles, was stored in our basement. And sadly, it was not locked up. So again, you can see like the impulsive kid at 10 years old trying to check off one of those boxes. Everything, everywhere I turned was not working. So I was turning to being gone. And somehow I loaded that rifle and turned it so it was pointing directly at my chest. And the last thing I remember before pulling the trigger is I was unsure of which side of my chest my heart was on. And in the quick second before pulling the trigger, I shifted that rifle from my left to my right, and I fired it. At this point, I want to be very emphatic with you all and just come up for air for a moment. And just because I don't want anyone to ever accuse me of glorifying that story, because honestly, what happened next was the most trauma I hope to ever endure in my life. And I think back time and time again about the intense and unspeakable pain I subjected my family and my friends to. Now lying on the ground, realizing in a blur that, oh my gosh, I'm still here. I'm still here. But immediately, as you can imagine, it was very difficult to breathe. And I found myself thinking and transitioning with my emotions in the moment. Shandy, what have you done? See, my misunderstanding of basic anatomy likely saved my life, because if that rifle was pointed back to my left, I would have likely shattered my heart and died instantly. Instead, now I was in a position where my natural survival instincts were kicking in, because all I wanted was to live. I remember making it across our basement floor where we had a telephone, and I was trying to dial my mom's place of work, the hospital. And this is a little bit ironic that I could actually get out, and I still can see the telephone today. I could get out the first 3 numbers, the 2, the 5, and the 8, but I could not get out the last 4. And the reason why that's a bit ironic is that this was 2 weeks prior to the launching of 911 in our small rural town. So I don't know if any of you have been in a position where you felt like you were meeting death's match, but that's exactly where I was. This was not good. As you can imagine, I couldn't breathe. I had lost so much blood, likely in and out of consciousness. And it was that moment. I didn't know if I was going to make it. For some reason, I can only tie to a miracle. My mom, the nurse, my mom, the hero, came home from work early that day. She found me, her 10-year-old little girl, dying on our basement floor. And now that I'm a mom, I cannot imagine what was going through her mind and through her heart in that moment. But thankfully, instead of going into mom freakout mode, she stayed in nurse mode, quickly grabbing beach towels to stanch the loss of blood and making 2 quick phone calls, the first of which was to my dad, whom she realized could speed home from the hospital faster than calling for an ambulance. And the second phone call was to her place of work, the hospital, to have them prepare for a GSW, which I would later learn is short for gunshot wound, her own daughter. The next thing that's happening is my dad is scooping me up, very heroic-like, and cradling me while my mom drove our old Cutlass sedan. And it's interesting, it was in this moment on this ride that argument, it no longer mattered. What mattered now was that I survived, that I live. It must have been pure anguish for my parents to hand me over to the medical staff, but that's what they knew they had to do, right? And in true ER fashion, things got pretty crazy. I remember bright lights and people rushing to and fro and instruments and tubes and people yelling. And then I recall some of their faces coming in and out of focus, and I knew them and they knew me. They were part of that village that was raising me. In the next instant, they're readying me for Aeromed helicopter bound for Traverse City while I'm repeating 2 words. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. See, that bullet that was meant to kill me passed entirely through my chest, out my shoulder, up through the ceiling, where it lodged itself in the door of our refrigerator, just to give you an idea of the power of that rifle. And even though I missed my heart that day, I came this close to not making it. And I came this close that there would be 1 less 5th grader on the Birch Street Elementary School roster that fall. That day, I nearly wrote history in the worst way imaginable for my family and friends. And that my parents would only have photographs and memories to hang on to of their little 10-year-old girl. And I think about things like, had I not survived, they would have had to go on wondering what went wrong and why, and what could they have done different? And my poor dad would have had to muster on knowing that we parted on less than loving terms. Who knows how they would have endured every future birthday and Christmas to come. And I also think about things like, what would I have looked like in my high school graduation picture some 7 years later? And who and what might I become? Would I have gone to college? Would I have married? Would I have had children? Would I have had a career that chipped in on a world craving doers and helpers? But instead of succumbing and being carried off to the cemetery in a casket with my father, mother, and brother grieving something they never saw coming. By the grace of God, I pulled through. And I'm here now talking to you. After they performed, I know, right? Amen. Whoo, it still gives me like goosebumps, and trust me. After the medical staff performed life-saving surgery on me, I was in the hospital for a few weeks, receiving infusions of blood and fighting against the onset of infection and just healing and physical therapy on my lungs mainly. And it was during this time I had many friends and family that came to visit me or sent expressions of love. All of that was happening while I came to realize that at 10 years old, perhaps especially at 10 years old, that I counted and I mattered. I was going to get a second chance at this thing we call life. And I learned truly how loved I was and that having a different head of hair did not matter in the least. So as you can see, my story starts with a bad haircut and a gunshot wound, but that's not actually what I want you to take away from our time together today. Instead, I want to give you all the gift of my knowledge. And I'm especially excited with all of you here in attendance and the influences you have in the lives of children. All right, so after my suicide attempt, this is kind of interesting. The local paper identified it as an accident, and they didn't probably do anything wrong. They probably just were going off of the police report, but it just goes to show exactly how taboo of a subject the idea of suicide was. In my family, if you were close to us, you knew the truth. Like our church family probably knew the truth, and our close friends really close to us. But even recently, I had someone tell me a story about how my mom in the hospital was just saying it was just an accident. It was just an accident. Well, I know better now, and it was not just an accident. We just happened to hide behind that headline for a long time. And in fact, I've decided to dedicate this part of my life to telling the truth. And I'm here today because I want you to become part of the truth as an advocate for mental health. My wish for all the parents and grandparents on this call and everyone, really everyone, is to normalize the conversation around mental health. And I cannot think of a better time than today, the 1 year anniversary of a pandemic, where the door is open about mental health, to have these conversations, to write these letters, to connect about that uncomfortable subject. Suicide is preventable. But here's the deal. Why is it so easy for us to say, I'm physically ill, I need help, and we'll go see a doctor? Whether it's for the flu or a broken arm, we'll run there, sure. But we tend to refuse to use that same voice when we're struggling mentally or emotionally. So first takeaway is talking. And I realize there's some people on the call that no way are you going to talk to someone. I'm here to encourage you to do exactly that. I don't care if you pick a therapist, a counselor, or have to go through 5 of them. The idea of meeting with a professional listener or a pastor is a beautiful thing. And if you happen to be in a moment of crisis, or you know someone that is, on your screen are 2 resources, and you can Google this at any point in time, but the suicide prevention hotline is 1-800-273-TALK, and you can text 741-741 to receive a licensed counselor on the other end to help. See, I used to be afraid to share my story, but that wasn't helping anyone. And then just on the theme of tearing down the wall that tends to surround mental health, I want to show you this slide. Every mental health advocate, every doctor, every therapist, counselor wants you to see, and I want you to see this picture. On the left, we have a scan of a brain of someone that's not depressed, and on the right, a scan of a brain of someone that is. When I first saw this, even myself years ago, my eyes opened. I think we all can agree that this person on the right cannot just get over it the next day, right? Isn't it also interesting, though, that if this slide was labeled brain cancer, we would be running to the doctor. But with it being mental health, we still feel judged, lost, and many times we still won't seek out help. But just like cancer, you don't choose to have a mental health illness. You cannot just get over it the next day. There is a physical difference, and right here it shows you the chemical imbalance. On to another concept to think about is this sentence. And if I'll say it twice just because I think it's that critical. In the same amount of time that it took for that bullet to pass through my chest, it took for me to go from wanting to die to wanting to live, a millisecond. In the same amount of time that it took for me to go from wanting to die to wanting to live was a millisecond. I've actually talked with two people that have jumped from bridges, and it was the same thing for them. The moment they did it, they wished they could get it back. One of them is a paraplegic, and the other one, I don't know how, but he has function of his body, and he speaks just like I do to anyone that will listen to try to save lives. So a millisecond, if you're not familiar, or if you don't recall, there are 1,000 milliseconds in just 1 second. In our 45 minutes, 2,700,000 milliseconds in my time, right, with you here today. And I'm asking you to get through that sticky millisecond, to seek out that help. Because see, typically people who attempt to take their lives, they don't want to die. They want the pain to end. It is within you and your kids and anyone in your sphere of influence to develop coping strategies of what would help you if you find yourself in a tough spot emotionally or mentally, or if the chemicals are off. There are strategies that can help. And I've talked through some of them already, but I do think the idea that thinking through, not that you want to sit back and always think through bad situations, but I think the idea of using visualization techniques is important. And by the way, kids are ready for this conversation. You have both the sports kid and the performance kid, and maybe you too can just identify that the sports kid is likely to have gone through, or maybe a little bit older, more middle school up to high school child is used to visualizing, the ball going through the net or the catch or the throw or whatever it is, or how they bat. They're used to visualizing that. And same with the performing arts kid. They watch themselves on tape. They visualize themselves on stage. So why don't we take the time to visualize bad days, bad weeks, and or a really bad moment, or being whatever, this chemical imbalance, and visualize reaching out and getting help. Who are we going to go to, right? Who are we actually going to call or text or walk to? What are we physically going to do in a rock bottom moment? It's also within you today to do the things that set you up for success in everyday life. I call it mental health 101. Maybe that's exercise and eating right. Those are huge things for mental health. Maybe it's meditating, writing, getting in nature, and making sure you foster those relationships that mean something to your heart. I find it interesting that when I speak in schools, I have the students brainstorm what sets them up for success. And, they say these things like listening to music and everything I just named. And 9 out of 10 of the items you can do during a pandemic, interestingly enough. The connecting with friends is probably the one that's a little more challenging, or we've had to be a little more creative with. After my episode as a 10-year-old, I came to understand and believe in the power of one. What a difference just one person can make in the life of somebody else. I chose the world for this PowerPoint slide mainly because I like to think of how people who have affected me in my life, they really affected the tilt of the Earth's axis for me. It was a game changer. I had people like Ms. Blue and Ms. Wallum that took time to really, not only did they visit me in the hospital, they brought me organized pre-social media again. They organized this huge sack of gifts from all the teaching staff and all the employees at my elementary school. It was like Christmas at the hospital, and I needed it. I got to open a present every day, and I got to open a present after my physical therapy sessions where they were like beating on my chest trying to get my lungs working again. You want to motivate a 10-year-old kid? Bring them a Santa present. That's going to do it. It was amazing. They also helped foster my entry back into school with my awful haircut. They somehow made that okay. I had coaches knock on my door and basically say, you want to go to the gym? You want to be on my team? Because they knew that exercising would be great for me, but even bigger than that was being a part of a team with a team goal and having that team camaraderie and being something bigger, right? I also had my pastor Riley and his wife Jan and my BFF as a kid, who's still my best friend today. Interesting enough, we live 2 hours away from where I grew up, and they all live in the same town as me now. So they too moved down here. So what I'm getting at is I had so many people check on me frequently, and they encouraged me to try new things. And I found exercise, being in nature, and diving into my faith as great things for me. You might be wondering, well, what about my parents, right? What happened there with that relationship? Well, my parents, and this is a worthwhile, like, take home message for many of us, is that we have these things called love languages. If you're not familiar, it'd be like acts of service, words of affirmation, gifts, physical touch, quality time, that kind of thing. Well, my parents took the time to research and understand what my love languages was. And well, because isn't it funny that we tend to communicate love in a way we interpret love? However, if we're really trying to communicate love, why wouldn't we communicate it in a way that person interprets love? That's a nice challenge for all of us, right? As we go through our everyday life. And yes, kids absolutely have their own love language. So I want to challenge you all to do exactly this, because of I gave you plenty of examples of the power of one, of what it's meant in my life. But I want to remind you to don't forget the power that you have. It does not matter your title at work, or if you're retired, or if you're a stay-at-home parent. It does not matter if you have this crazy social status, or if you're an introvert. It doesn't matter. You looking at me right now absolutely has the ability to make a difference in the life of somebody else. And I think most of you on this Zoom call already know that, but it is nice to have a reminder every once in a while just how big someone, again, I go back to that world, how big someone can affect the tilt of the earth in someone else. So don't forget the power that you have. Moving on, starting as a young adult, I enlisted in the aid of a professional listener. It actually took studying abroad and 9/11 to get me there, but I finally put aside what were long-term prejudices against a professional listener to go. I was actually pretty blessed because it was while I was at Aquinas and it was free. And my friend was going to a counselor and she's like, why don't you? Because we were still trying to enter back into the United States and back into this culture, coming off of studying abroad in Spain, where when 9/11 happened while I was studying abroad. As you can imagine, that first appointment was interesting. And I still will never forget the therapist saying something along the lines of, Shandy, I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for sharing with me. And then she said, I hope it's okay. I'd like to make this a long-term relationship. And I knew right away I was in for quite a few appointments as we started to peel back the onion layers of what all had happened in my life, because I had not done much therapy at all. We tried a little bit when I was 10, and the mental health world, again, has come a long way since 1991. But in that process of therapy, I discovered how to really accept all of myself and love myself. And here's what I really needed to realize and did realize, and that is that nobody, and I mean nobody, gets through this chaotic life without bearing blemishes and developing scars. That's kind of why I find the name Embracing Imperfections pretty fitting for my nonprofit today. And by the way, I still absolutely do maintenance counseling today. And I would say I have a pretty great life. And I still choose to have that as an option where I can meet with her whenever I want. It's great. I don't know why we don't all do it, to be honest with you. I talked of blemishes and scars a moment ago, and here's the deal. I really believe the difference between caving into them and living with them can be summarized in one powerful word. And it's a big, powerful feeling, and that's the idea of hope. Because I chose to lean on hope, I didn't die after pulling that trigger as a confused 10-year-old kid. Instead, I went on to do crazy things, great things. I had success academically and socially, and just all the things, and athletically, both in high school and college. I was the homecoming queen of all things. And I played 2 college sports, and then I ended up as the director of a premier fitness facility on the west side of Michigan. And now, more than 14 years after that role, I hung up my hat for more moments like this, sharing my story in hopes of cultivating a whole new kind of team. A mental advocacy team is kind of what I like to call it. But I'll stress that I don't forget about what Mother Teresa taught us, and what that is if you want to make a difference in this world, start by loving your family. This is my husband, Bill, and my twin boys that are now 10. And yes, I was so scared for them to turn 10. That needed its own therapy session and still makes me want to tear up today. But they're twins, even though they don't look like it. And that's our dog, George, 80 pounds ago. He's now huge. See, here's the deal. Would we be a family, right? Had my mom not come home from work early that day, or had the medical staff not been on their A game, or frankly, had God not turned me into a miracle? I'm thankful for that. My time with you here today has a few themes to it. Let me go the right direction. Talking, getting through the millisecond, mental health strategies, and the power of one. But here's the deal. What do you need to be doing today that you're not? What conversation do you need to be having? Or what letter do you need to write? I am grateful that you all listened to me today, and I'm grateful for the gifts that you are to your community, your family, your Kiwanis club. May you carefully consider my words. Don't be overwhelmed by them. Sift through them, act on them. And I'll leave you with a few final thoughts. That hope I spoke of is a force designed to overcome. And I don't know if you know this, but hope is already inside of you. And I really believe that hope is whispering to you now, even if you're not ready for it, right? Let it drench you with its grace. And if you happen to be here with us navigating difficult times, I'm here to tell you that you are loved, even if you don't feel it. I'm here to tell you that you are pretty or handsome, even if you don't believe that or see that. And I'm here to tell you that you were given this life for a reason, even if you can't grasp those details. I want to encourage you to fight, because it will be worth the struggle. And I believe that because inside of every one of our powerful and healing hearts lives the power of one. So before we go on to Q&A, I just want to say thank you to and give you an example of the power of one and what has been birthed out of that. Pretty amazing things. And I see the chat is like blinking at me, so I'll get to the chat too in a second. And just the power of one, I just want to say thank you for Greg Smith for inviting me to say, hey, let's talk some more. We met at an in-person conference of all things back in November when nobody was going anywhere. And that's opened some doors, and it eventually led to the partnership between Kiwanis and my nonprofit, Embracing Imperfections. And you can even find that information right on your own website in the service partner area. But something kind of neat that came out of that and multiple conversations is something we're excited to announce to you all tonight. You're welcome to attend, and we'll get into 2 ways that you could be helpful to us. And here's kind of what it is. It's called the Youth Summit on Suicide, and it'll be live streamed so anyone can attend from anywhere. It's a free event for the first 1,000 registrations rather. And it's meant for youth to basically take in information that could help them. There's a day, the high school is 2.5 hours on May 19th, and the middle school is 2 hours on the 20th. We've got a great lineup, and this is something that not only Kiwanis is sponsoring, but myself, Embracing Imperfections, and we've got great people involved. Jasper's Game Day she's a unique 18-year-old, if you want to check out her website. Anyway, this is just super exciting event, and it could not be better timing now that we're a year into this pandemic, and it's our way of trying to reach out and help people. And by the way, some of you might be thinking, ooh, I don't know, suicide. Do we talk about that? Could that cause that to happen? Well, that's actually a myth. So I'm glad you thought about it so I could address that. Talking about suicide does not cause it to happen. It does matter how you talk about it, and obviously giving the right resources. And let's be honest, we'll prepare our youth for sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but we won't talk about mental health many times. So this is absolutely something that we need to be talking about. It's the second leading cause of death, basically, for young people. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So 2 ways I was asked, how can Kiwanians help? Well, you're already helping put on the event, which is awesome, in collaboration, but 2 ways. One is promote the heck out of it to your local school. Please have them attend. We will have the only real ticket, so to speak. The teacher can register, but the only real ticket or requirement is that the school mental health staff come. And why we're doing that is so that if a student is triggered or needs anything, then they can reach out and directly message or video chat with a counselor right there privately through the Hop-In platform. The other way you could help is sponsor it. We can have, these things are not cheap. I don't know if you're aware, the world of all things digital conferences do cost money, and we invite anyone that's feeling inclined to sponsor it. We would love more sponsorships. So you can just, maybe Sue could put, or I could put my contact information in the chat as well. So anyway, I want to thank you all, and I just really appreciate you all being here tonight, and I will stop sharing my screen and start looking at the chat and take questions.
Thank you, Shandy. Very touching, very important subject. And as we all talk about the pandemic and the mental health issues, the aspect of normalizing these conversations, where we used to hide them, didn't talk if you were seeing a listening professional, as you said, a professional listener or a counselor, because that was not a good thing.
Right.
You just didn't do that. So, and the power of one for all of us, we all know about the power of one, and this is another great way to look at it, from the power of one being what we have going today. The availability of talk, thinking about the millisecond, wonderful opportunity. We want to thank you for partnering with Kiwanis for the summit. We will make sure that this information, of course, will be in the recording that we send out to everybody, or let everybody know that's there. But I wanted to, I'll put Shandy's information in the chat here, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and go ahead and talk. The floor is yours.
I'll ask something. So if one of us, if I'm talking to a parent of, friends of mine, that they're parents of kids, and they mention that there's, their son or daughter seems to have some issues, or I don't know how mental health will come, but something that might trigger some. Is there anything I should tell them that they should look for or do first, or just what do I just listen, or what do I do?
So I think that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I mean, there's multiple avenues that you could take, but I would make sure to cover your basis in terms of being a great listener to that friend. That might be all they need to in general. And I would ask them, what do they need from you? Because you can give them, you know, encourage them to see a counselor if they haven't already. You can give them the 1-800 number. You could give practical advice that they might not be thinking of. I think if my parents could go back, they absolutely wish that they would have had that rifle locked up. Or nowadays, you know, drugs, knives, you get the idea. So sometimes when people are in such panic mode of what's going on, they're not thinking so clearly. So you could give, again, practical advice. You could be the listening ear, encourage that counselor. And I would ask them, how can I help you, to make sure that you can really hear what they're needing. There are, you know, different things to probably be aware of. Again, I like to stay in my lane in terms of, I'm not a doctor, you know, and I have just my life experience, but there are warning signs that you could Google or look up. But I think it's important, you know, a lot of times people will talk about dying, and you could ask that question: does your son or daughter, have they talked about it? Are they, do they feel, has there been a dramatic change recently in something? Did something happen? Do they talk about being a burden to others? Are they behaving recklessly, sleeping too much, too little, withdrawn, things like that, I think are worth exploring in conversation. And then I would get them to a professional with their doctor, or encourage them to seek out the next, step. Sometimes people just need to be told that it's okay to seek out help, you know? Great question.
Let's see, I see Linda has her mic open. Linda?
I do. Thank you. You know, I think it's first, thank you for telling your story, because there are so many stories out there that aren't being told, and people that are living with the stigma that very much still exists when it comes to mental illness. And far too often, the first indication that there is a problem is the suicide attempt or the
Right.
successful suicide.
Right.
That can be the first notice.
Yeah.
So
When it's too
I
late.
just want to say thank you for sharing your story. Many of us have been touched by this in ways very close to us. And we need people who are willing to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I absolutely hid my story. I was blessed to listen to, I don't know if you all have heard of John O'Leary. I was, in my previous career, I was blessed to attend many leadership development conferences. And I still remember the moment I was in West Palm listening to the speaker, and we had many parallels from his childhood to mine, although he like lit himself on fire. And it too was labeled as an accident. And then he literally, you know, and figuratively hid his scars. He's very lucky to be alive. He wrote a book called On Fire. But his main takeaway from his presentation was that people, if you are not sharing your story, get out of your own way and share it. It's why you're here. And I just, that boom, as you can imagine, that was just a ton of bricks. And it was followed by an ugly cry, a big meeting with my husband. And then all of a sudden I was on a stage, like it just like happened. It's not easy to share it, but I feel like anytime I can, I will. I would love any ins you have to schools. Sometimes they're so excited to have me, and sometimes they're like, what? Who are you? And what are you going to do to my students? What do I have to deal with the parents? You know, and that world is opening up, obviously, in terms of talking about things, mental health. But you're welcome, Linda. It's it's the second leading cause of death of young people. So I'm not surprised that people on this call have been affected by it. And I'll do everything I can to help prevent it for sure. Hey, Sue, could you also copy and paste the website, or is it maybe easy for?
It's in there. Yep.
Oh,
I
great.
paste,
Okay.
it's all in there. Your email, the website, and your phone number.
Okay. Well, I just thought I'd mention that your website and the partner
Yes.
has the flyer. If you all are wanting to promote the flyer for the Youth Summit on Suicide, that's on your own website under the, I think Sue's going to put the link in.
I'll put the link up here.
Great.
I see Eric has his mic open.
No, our church has like 50 high schoolers in the youth group. Is this the summit designed to like show everyone, or should it be just the kids that are at risk, or?
Great question. This is for everyone. Yep. You have, oh, I guess you can't see my screen anymore, but the presenters are a gentleman out of just different nonprofits in the area, another gentleman, yep, like the No Resolve. Yeah, everybody. To answer your question, middle schoolers have their day, high schoolers have their day, and it's actually designed during the school day on purpose. We're hoping actually schools will give extra credit for attending and embrace it fully. So yeah, I would announce it to the youth in your church and ask them if their school administrators will allow basically to have their whole grade or school attend. And the beauty of that is then you have, their counselors are built right in for them. That is one positive. I like to always look at this pandemic, like what are the positives that have come from it? One of the positives, not that we don't want to do it ever again, obviously, but one of the positives is that our youth are more likely to meet with people because it's through a screen, meaning they'll meet with a counselor because they have that protective barrier and they're not judged for going down to the counselor's office when all their peers can see them going down to the counselor's office. So the door has been opened, and thankfully, because they've needed it. But sorry, I'm on a tangent, but Eric, to answer your question, it's meant for middle schoolers and high schoolers and anybody that happens to care about youth prevention, suicide prevention with youth.
And for those of us who are not from the Michigan area, the times are Eastern Standard Time or Eastern
Yes.
Daylight Time.
Yeah.
So the high school program, for those of you that are out on the West Coast, will probably work. You're welcome to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning if you want to join us for the middle school program. No one will stop you.
Yeah, and we're going to record it too, so we can work something out.
There you go.
I'm sending that to our school superintendent, so we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Eric. That's great.
Perfect. Let's see. Any other questions do we have out here?
I know it's not as exciting as like the gentleman last week with all the tech stuff.
That's okay. Every program brings its own life, right? And that's what's great about our programs is that we're continuously, bringing different views and different opportunities for people to learn. And I think, like this with with Kiwanis and the opportunities that we have to work with youth from our K kids in elementary schools all the way up through, college. It never hurts to have this information available, or even a resource.
I'll say one thing. I'll say one thing about this in terms of promoting it. Shandy is going to be the keynote speaker at our Michigan Key Club Service Leadership Conference later this month, and so our plan is to use the Key Clubbers and that are part of the schools, and then even the Builders Club students to promote this and to get those people throughout the whole school to attend.
Yeah, Linda's comment, Kiwanians like to have fun, but we want to help kids even more. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm really excited. Actually, Sue and I were talking before you all got on about the keynote coming up on the 20th. And my experience with the few Key Clubbers that I've talked with just in preparation for the conference, what a delightful group of young individuals that are ready to go after life. And I'm excited to talk about all things leadership, growth, and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's going to be a really fun day. But by the way, I'm reading all your comments. Thank you. Yes, U of M Depression Center is participating. So as it relates to the youth summit, there's kind of some unique things. One presenter is specifically for those that have had somebody die by suicide. Notice my choice of words there. It's no longer committed suicide. You don't commit cancer just like you don't commit suicide. So it's they died by suicide. It's a little awkward at first, but this is something we definitely have to commit to. So Michael's Place will be presenting to students that have had a friend or a family member died by suicide, and it'll be just them. The U of M Depression Center, sorry, Sparty. U of M Depression Center is going to be presenting on their peer-to-peer program. That's pretty exciting because let's be honest, if a kid is struggling, they're likely to go to their friend first before you, me, a teacher, or a counselor. So a lot of schools nowadays have a peer listening group. And if you don't have one, that's what they'll actually be walking away with a manual from U of M that's evidence-based. So if you currently have one, it's a great way to enhance it. If you don't have one, it's a great way to get started. Another unique speaker, he actually works for the federal government and lives in Maryland. He is with the Black Mental Wellness Lounge that was birthed out of the pandemic. And it's the idea that these are his words, that Black and brown folks don't necessarily understand or want to go into all things mental health as quick. There's an extra hesitation there. And I think of a better speaker than Brandon Johnson for that world of just suicide prevention and trying to get that wall down. And then Dennis from No Resolve does what I do in terms of assemblies, but he's coming at it from a unique angle of the arts. He is a musician, and how that became a coping tool and can be a coping tool for Luke. He lost his dad to suicide. So yeah, so okay, so a question.
Shandy, I had a quick question.
Go ahead.
I was just curious. Sue's been doing such a great job. I may be a little clumsy at even asking it, but Sue's done such a great job with a number of us of allowing us to maybe do some introspection and learn a little bit more about our perceived biases and those types of things. And I just wondered, is there a stigma, is there a bias to admitting that you have attempted suicide at some time? Is it difficult when you were dating? I mean, I love the fact that you've got a happy ending now with a wonderful family and everything, but is there a hesitancy for people to even bring up the subject, or do they walk on eggshells because you have admitted so courageously that you have experienced this in the past?
You mean with how they treat me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or others that have,
you know, for sure. Yeah.
Similar.
Yeah. To answer, I mean, it's there, but I also think we've come so far. And what I'm finding just as much is that once we're through knowing it, they almost, you can kind of see a different, almost like a process happening in their head where they get to a point where they're like over the startle factor, but then circling around to the maturity of, well, what can we learn from this, and where can we grow, and what do I need to know? Or if someone what isn't my friend because of it, I guess I don't know it. But
you don't want them.
yeah, you know, to be honest with you, I think there's a reason why I was in my 30s when I started speaking about it, you know, as opposed to as a teenager, because yeah, it's a big subject, you know, and so there's a lot of healing and growing that has to happen before you can even talk about it. And to your point, there absolutely is a stigma around it. For sure. I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question, but yes, it's just one of those things I think that I personally I had to, Well, there's that in the Man in the Arena, the Teddy Roosevelt poem. I have to go back to that quite a bit because I let plenty of critics I've stumbled over them, and it kept me from talking and sharing for so long. I realized that I no longer can do that because there's a bigger purpose here at play.
Shandy, we have a couple questions that came in for us. Thanks, Brad, for that question. Where do you suggest we go to resources for people who have lost someone due to suicide? Our community had a 19-year-old who we all knew was a very happy-go-lucky guy, shot himself last night and left a very sad note. Where can we send people?
I like a couple of options just because I just happen to know their missions. I know there's more out there. There's more national outfits and things like that, but two in Michigan that I like is I Understand is out of West Michigan, and her video alone on her homepage is a great starting spot. It's I Understand and Love Heals. She's a big nonprofit in my area that's post-suicide kind of information and help. And there are groups that meet digitally, like there. And if you don't have this locally, I think you can meet with this group. But there's a group somewhere that has a group therapy option. And there's a lot of times doing suicide prevention walks and things like that. The American Association, all of that. It's all out there. It's just kind of picking and choosing what fits them the most. But I do like that video on the I Understand homepage. And then furthermore, Michael's Place has some good, Michael's Place, it's out of Traverse City, Michigan. They come along, they're not necessarily counselors, but they come alongside you in the grieving process because it's very different than say a death from a different reason. So those are a couple of options.
What Kathy, who's asked the question, is actually from Pennsylvania, who's with us tonight. Is there a national recommendation?
Yeah, I believe I would start with the American Association of Suicidal Ideology. There's that, and then I'm just lacking the name on another one in terms of like post-suicide. I'll see if I can't dig it up.
Okay.
Questions.
Okay. What about, we had a question raised about a presentation tool for elementary students.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not there yet. I see a very mental health focused presentation in my future because I like starting young. You'll see a lot of anti-bullying initiatives at the elementary level. I just have not done that yet. But, I think it couldn't be better. A person sponsoring the Youth Summit on Suicide, the PR company sponsoring it, they're good friends. I think in Wisconsin lost their 10-year-old. Like I'm not the only 10-year-old that ever attempted, right? So, and that's an elementary age, but obviously it has to be an appropriate conversation. I guess what I would say is I hope to do something someday for elementary schools that's age appropriate, but in general, my advice for that world is to open the door to talk about bad days, feelings, what to do with feelings, and different coping strategies. My boys are both in counseling, absolutely, both of them. I knew that I was an impulsive kid, so to be an impulsive kid and need strategies and need outlets that people literally go to school for that stuff. I am not going to come up with the best coping strategy for a 10-year-old. So, and that to that point, I think I would also involve counselors when talking to elementary kids. If I do it like on a professional level, I would involve counselors too. So great question.
Okay, well, Shandy, I want to thank you for being with us tonight. There's some great comments in the chat. Gail has put some information in here about the Jordan BinionProject.org does similar work. Gail's with us from the Pacific Northwest. JBP was formed by two parents who lost their 17-year-old son to suicide. It started in Washington State and is now national. So we will make sure that these tools are available to everyone here, this information. We will be, as I mentioned, we have recorded the session tonight. We will make that available as soon as I do the jumping into the getting it onto YouTube this evening. But you have Shandy's information. If you are interested in participating in the Service Leadership Conference for the Michigan District of Key Club, which is on March 20th, please get in connection with me personally, because I am managing that program for them that day, so I can get you the opportunity to participate in that if you'd like to see that. I don't have the information off the top of my head what time right now. I know it's been set, but I just don't remember what it was. So, and if anybody else has any information that would like to talk to Shandy, you have her email. If you didn't get through it with it there, we can get it to you. Just send me an email. But I want to thank you very much for sharing your story with us tonight. We appreciate that and look forward to the partnership that we here in the Michigan District have built, and hope that, you know, throughout the work of your nonprofit and the Kiwanis members here in Michigan and around the world, that we can truly make a difference in the work that we do. So with that, I will thank you. I'm going to just stop the recording at this point. Shandy, any last words?
I thought I'd answer the question of earlier that I Need a Lighthouse is a nice post-suicide, more national initiative. And then if someone is still really struggling, just because it's a suicide prevention hotline doesn't mean they're not going to take anyone's phone call that's struggling with someone else who lost suicide. Many times suicide happens in clusters. So they're ready, willing, and wanting to talk to you as well. But I think at the end of the day, I really appreciate having me. And I meant what I said in terms of you're all meant to be here for a reason. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.